Well, folks, my name is Jamal Binder. I'm the chair of the board of Movement in Omaha for Race Equity, which is an organization dealing with race, anti-racism issues and dealing with bringing people into circles to talk about some of the racism that exists in our community and our society. And so we're very much involved in trying to bring people together to deal with these various issues and provide different kinds of services in our community that many other nonprofits and other organizations are afraid to touch. Today we have with us is Leo Lewis II, who is known for his outspoken ideals about the needs of African American community. He served 14 years on the Malcolm X Memorial Foundation board and decided to move on to other ventures. He was also in the movie business for a while, and we're aware of that. And a couple of years ago, we utilized his expertise to talk about issues related to challenges that African Americans experience in the dual push out and the expelling of African American students in the plantation schools in the community. And this was at a community forum at First United Methodist Church and so on. We invited him on Throwing Down Some Heavy Light to give an update of his ventures, as well as what he's considering considering many African American leaders in social justice have been put in prisons, other issues that we face in our community and our society. Some have been murdered, you name it, unjustly. And again, we have a list of many who have been murdered in Omaha by the police department, and many of those, and none of those police officers spent a night in jail, things like that. So we invited Bill to share some of his experience, what he's going to be involved in, and maybe give us an update, some things he's worked on. Again, it's been 14 years of working with a key organization. Our community deals with Malcolm X and many of the legacies and teachings that he has left us with. So Leo, I want to start off and give you an opportunity to first share a little bit more with the viewing audience about yourself. Can you go for it?
Right on. I appreciate you, Jamal, and I just want to first say thank you for this opportunity. You're one of the first people that actually reached out after announcing of my resignation and said, "Hey, man, we want to talk about this. We want to see how things are going." So I appreciate that. So for those who don't know me, most people who tuned into this probably do or have heard of me. My name is Leo Lewis. I'm a native of Omaha, Nebraska, born and raised. I've spent my whole entire life here. So my joining of the Malcolm X Memorial Foundation was obviously inevitable because I was born with the spirit to see change in my community and see change among the people that look like me. And through my life cycle, I've experienced a number of things, from being in a single parent household to poverty to gangs to the streets to going into the school system and being basically treated like a lot of Black children are treated and suffering from those disparities, having engagements with law enforcement that were unwarranted, etc. So I had a lot of life experiences. What really got me involved in community was a support group for individuals that wanted to leave street life that my brother Chrome, my brother Carl got involved in 2007. And from there, we met a number of individuals, including Roy Davenport, who was our mentor at that time, who did a lot of youth work during that time period. But he also introduced us to Ben Gray and Willie Barney, who was just starting the Empowerment Network. And from there, they started a gang intervention program. That gang intervention program eventually hired us. And through that process, we met Lisa Ariano and Kruma, who were members of the Malcolm X Memorial Foundation. At that time, I didn't know anything about Malcolm X Foundation. I had a perm, I had a conch, as Malcolm would have called it. And at that time period, I wasn't interested. I was like, I don't want nothing to do with that Black stuff. We cool over here. I'm dealing with the streets. We good. But from there, moving forward, we started to learn a little bit about Malcolm on the peripherals, but we still dealing with hardcore individuals in the streets every Sunday at our found period meetings. Well, those meetings continued to grow, and during one of those meetings, an individual or a group came, the United Nations of Islam, and they showed us that they grew their own food, made their own food. So we realized individuals weren't getting jobs. So what we decided we would do is we would start gardening to grow our own food, so an individual can put food on the table for themselves, even if they were not employed, and we were going to get the streets to do so. So I went and volunteered at City Sprouts Community Garden, and at the same time, the Empowerment Network was starting this summer jobs program. And somehow, some way, the summer jobs program got merged with our gardening effort. And I ended up gardening while working with some students from the summer jobs program. The City Sprouts Garden wanted to send me to Milwaukee to learn more about gardening so they could send a Black face, because they were a white institution at that time. They needed a Black face to go represent them somewhere else. So long story short, when I got back, we were able to make that connection in Milwaukee. And also, people heard about this young Black guy gardening. Then I started doing more gardens. The reason why this is relevant is because this is how I ran into the Malcolm X Memorial Foundation. Started gardening. I ended up getting a contract to do 12 gardens in North Omaha. It was my first program. I hired 5 guys straight from the streets, and we went out and built gardens all over North Omaha. We built one on 25th and Decatur. We built one at Yale Park Apartments, which at that time was still transitioning from Tommy Rose. We built one on 18th and Spalding. We built gardens at the Nebraska Children's Home Society. We built gardens all over North Omaha. And one of those gardens was the Malcolm X Memorial Foundation, who had put in a bid to have a garden built. And that's when I got closer to the Malcolm X Foundation. Started learning about some of their efforts. I seen their flyers, and I was like, hey, y'all got to do better. This is not cool. And so Sharif Lawaru took it with humility and said, hey, if you can do better, brother, then come on and help us out. And so from there, I helped them do a flyer. I found out they were trying to purchase the building in 2010 that they have now as the visitor center. And I said, I can help you raise funds for that, because through gardening, I learned that I was getting the skill of being a community organizer, and I was getting good at it.
We'll have to move some other questions. I wanted to intro kind of brief, and then we can get into it. But yeah, I want to kind of get to some of the questions. Okay. We're going to have 30 minutes for you.
You asked for my introduction. I'm giving you
right. Not the complete resume, but what I'm saying,
I'm gonna wrap it up.
We can come back to something when we open up to the audience. So, but I want to get to some of those questions if I can.
Let me wrap this up real quick.
Okay.
So, from my relationship with the Malcolm X Memorial Foundation through community organizing, I ended up volunteering there for the last 14 years. We moved our found period meetings to the Malcolm X Foundation, and I've been there ever since. Now, there's a number of other efforts I've gotten involved in, but for those who don't know me, that's a small bit about me and my activities in this community.
Yeah. One of the main reasons we invited you is the fact that you're leaving them. And one of the things, one of the comments were made that you're leaving was linked up to your working with the Empowerment Network, and some of the other agendas are conflict to some of the things that they're involved with the Malcolm X Memorial Foundation. Give us a little insight of a little bit background, what makes your decision to leave after 14 years, and maybe some of the backdrops or things that we need to know as a community.
No, I love the hard-hitting question. So number one, I think it has to be put in the proper context. People have to know what the Malcolm X Memorial Foundation is. People need to know what the Empowerment Network is. They need to know how those two would be in conflict if they were ever in conflict. First, understand that the Empowerment Network is on paper called the African American Empowerment Network, not just Empowerment Network. The Malcolm X Memorial Foundation has a mission statement to work with and work for and on behalf of Black people within the legacy of Malcolm X. And if you notice from my story, I've already had relationships with most of the leadership in this community since 2007, 2008. So I've always had a relationship with the Empowerment Network. I've always, for the most of my nonprofit life, had a relationship with the Empowerment Network and a number of other organizations. So there's no conflict there as it relates to my work with those organizations. There's also not a conflict that I know of between the organizations. The Malcolm X Memorial Foundation has always been a part of supporting specific efforts that the Empowerment Network may have. And that's from previous presidency. So when I became the president, there was no transition or no change there. Now, as far as my independent work with the Empowerment Network, that's a different story, because my background, as I said, was gang intervention and prevention. I have grown into understanding the concept of community-led public safety. And so I do work with the Empowerment Network through community-led public safety, and I do have an agreement to work with them for that. And that was displayed during the 2019 Native Omaha days, when me and Willie Barney were actually out at 2 o'clock in the morning trying to stop the police from pepper spraying all of the people. And then in 2021, we were able to duplicate such efforts to keep the people safe during Native Omaha days. And so from there, that's when I've continued to commit to my community-led public safety work with the Empowerment Network. So that's my relationship with the Empowerment Network, if you wanted to know what that is.
Gotcha. And I want to move on to a few years ago, there was an article on the Reader where your board members or participants were on the cover of the Reader, and so on and so on. And you were featured also in that process and that story. What became of that exposure? Was that just like a PR piece, or did anything come out of that vast information that was shared throughout this whole city and elsewhere?
I would have wished that a lot more came out of it. The paper went all over the city, but when you talk about philanthropic dollars and you talk about a lot of local support, there was a lot of people who saw me and gave me personal accolades. There were a lot of people who saw board members and other individuals and gave them personal accolades. When you talk about a groundswell of support, whether that be financially or others, that didn't happen.
Okay.
There was a curiosity that was driven by community members, though, that did come visit the site, but nothing significant.
Some years ago, I was in the Black Studies department teaching, and also I participated in one of their Black Studies annual Malcolm X conference. They used to do that. They were very diligent about doing that. I think they stopped it for some nefarious reason and so on. And I don't know. I know there's some other crouton lunches out there. But my question is, there was this annual thing, and do you know why it was discontinued? And also, what is your relationship to that conference, or do you know much about that annual Malcolm X conference in Omaha, Nebraska, where Malcolm X was born?
Yep. So the Malcolm X Festival that UNO used to hold historically would partner with the Malcolm X Memorial Foundation. The reason it stopped that I know of in the most recent years is that COVID came in 2020. There was actually email transactions and plans to have that festival at UNO in 2020. Then COVID came and it didn't get picked up since then.
Okay, good. Now, I noticed that let me see, one of the things I know that one of the challenges that nonprofit boards experiences are deadbeat board members. I know that well, who offer little financial support, talent support, and board development. And how would you rank your various board members? I know you're not on the board anymore. Contribute to your mission, and again, that's can also apply to other boards in our community, particularly those who are African Americans. How is that determined from your perspective? In other words, the value of those board members, and give us a little insight of being a board member, because most people think that you were just working there, and most of the time you were a board member that I'm aware of. So talk a little bit more about that.
So my role at the Malcolm X Memorial Foundation before I left was board chair.
Okay.
Well, it was called board co-chair, but prior to 2019, I was just a board member at large. Folks need to know that the Malcolm X Memorial Foundation, for almost the 14 years I've been working there, well, it hasn't been 14, let me be more clear. For about 11 that I was there was never really a full-time staff person paid with W-2 for the Malcolm X Foundation. So all the work that you saw, including the work that I did, was volunteer.
Wait. Let's stop there.
Yeah.
All that work that happened was done by volunteer board members up there, a nonprofit running at that level. Or you follow me?
Yeah. Every town hall meeting, every community forum, every lecture that was going on, these things were all volunteer.
Wow.
For the Malcolm X Memorial Foundation. So after George Floyd, when folks became benevolent and wanted to support Black things, that's when Malcolm X Memorial Foundation had a little bit of money to hire an individual. And so we decided to hire our vice chair, Joanna LaFleur, to become the executive director. And that's how we were able to get our first true employee for the Malcolm X Foundation. Now, we did get some subcontractors in to do tours, but never a real employee.
You know, Lil, why that's very important, because some people think, and that's same with more, we're a volunteer board and we do more than some of these organizations with six figures and whatever. But most people are not aware that a lot of African Americans who are volunteering are doing some heavy duty lifting for some of these lazy organizations that won't bust a grape. And I say that seriously because if you look at the demographics, they can't even point to how many people they serve. And if you stand outside their buildings, you see very few people who look like me in our community going inside. But let me switch up a little bit because I want to get to the questions before we open it up. You know, Native Omaha is a frequently excluded. Native Omahans are oftentimes frequently excluded from key positions in the city majors institution, particularly in state government, and some of the local county governments. They bring in these carpetbaggers and Negroes and handkerchief heads out of here instead of those of us who grew up in Nebraska or grew up in Omaha. And my question is, why is that the case? And what many of us are thinking about, some of these young, useless professionals who have never busted a grape on racial justice issue. Again, show me the data. And they also, I know a lot of them spend their time, but let me come back specific to the question is, why do we sometimes see people who are from here excluded from key positions who are probably the most knowledgeable people about our community, from your perspective?
I think there's twofold to this. Omaha has a real problem with what I call celebrating mediocrity. I always talk about this. We celebrate mediocrity. You tied your shoes and you end up on the front page of the Omaha World Herald. Meanwhile, somebody else has, taken care of 5 kids on their own, living on a welfare budget, and graduated all 5 of those kids and sent them off to college on McDonald's money, and that person won't even be recognized. And I'm going to change that. I'm going to definitely change that. We're going to recognize some people. But in the meantime, what I'm saying is a lot of nonprofit organizations get pennies and then they do something that is not very significant. However, it would be touted as if it is significant. So you create a ceiling and you tell them this is how high you should jump. And then you celebrate that person as if they jump all the way to the moon. And when you do that, they'll think every time they jump that high that they are doing the best work possible. But you move to a larger city and get eaten alive because somebody has handicapped your real true potential because they've told you that you've arrived and you really ain't went nowhere. And I think that's a big problem with individuals in our community that we accept that. And so when we do great work, it is not celebrated, it is not appreciated. And I think that's another way. So then when individuals come in from out of town with just a little bit more credentials than what one might have on paper, they'll say, well, this person is the standard. You got to reach this. And then the nonprofit industrial complex kicks in. They hire that individual. And then the local individual, of course, can never meet that standard because they've already been celebrating their mediocre standard. But
Right.
if the individuals locally would exceed their standards, what would often happen is you intimidate the power structure here. And I think that's one of the things that I ran into a lot of times is I don't do simple things. And so when you exceed the expectations, then they recognize that you could be a threat to again, the status quo here in Omaha, Nebraska. But if we really want to grow, we got to go above that.
Yeah, and also related to that, there was years ago I went to a meeting in Creighton, and there must have been at least 200 folks who I've never seen and so on, and they were like dealing with business stuff. And what was fascinating about them is that I've never seen them after that one meeting at Creighton again. I think as far as, and most of them are looking like me and you, but again, they were dressed in suits and ties and penguin suits and you name it. And it was unfortunate to see folks like that, getting all these accolades and dancing around on top of tables, but you wouldn't see anyone busting a grape. Switching up to another question, I recall in one of our questions, one of our conversations, and we've had many, I wanted to focus on the murder of Malcolm X. Again, I found that Who Killed Malcolm X documentary fascinating. Again, it was one of those things that just resonated with me because too often we know how the FBI and the New York police and the CIA played a role in the death and murder of Malcolm X. And I wanted to focus on that. And then you push back and say they're related, but you said we should also look in terms of some of the contributions Malcolm X faced. How do you deal with that dichotomy or that, let's say, juxtaposition of his death and how he lived and some of the stuff that we're facing today?
Well, I'm very brief on the death of Malcolm X. I don't think that that's something to spend too much time acknowledging. One of the things that I know about Malcolm is that Malcolm, toward the end of his life, had finally come to a place where he was understanding the fullness of his potential and who he was as an individual outside of the Nation of Islam. And if we actually studied Malcolm's life, what we would know is that his death is not significant. What he did during his life is the most significant part. And we're the birthplace of Malcolm X. Understand, we birthed a whole leader here. Matter of fact, we birthed numerous leaders, including Rowena Moore, the founder of the Malcolm X Memorial Foundation. So I like to focus on the birthing of leadership here at the Malcolm X Memorial Foundation and here in Omaha, Nebraska in general. So
By the way,
that's my focus.
By the way, I'm gonna do a change up or a call an audible. When I first started working at St. Martin's over 40 years ago, around that time, I recall meeting Miss Bernie Moore, and she came down to the office and we talked a lot. And at some point when she was talking, I thought it would never happen because, again, I did not see the spot. It was not years later, but I was amazed at what she accomplished on her shoestring budget and how she pull this off from a visionary because we don't oftentimes celebrate her life. But she was a very humble woman. I know she worked at the packing house at some point, but she told me one story after the other. But it was just powerful to know that I met her and had a chance to talk to her on numerous occasions. I wish we would do much more to study who she was because what she left is monumental. We don't see black folks or folks in general leaving their that much land to the community. But just say a little bit more about her because I think she's one of those great unsung heroes in Omaha.
Oh yeah, I hope that people go visit the Malcolm X Memorial Foundation, especially when it opens up after its remodeling during the 100th birthday celebration on May 19th. And you can learn a lot more about Rowena Moore. This woman sat on 34 boards during her lifetime. She was one of the members of the black delegation that went to Gary, Indiana in 1972, where Betty Shabazz actually was, Coretta Scott King actually was, and it was a political convention.
Wow.
Rowena Moore moved to Omaha when she was approximately 13 years old. She came from Meridian, Oklahoma. She worked at the packing house, and she would have possibly been there at the same time Earl Little was there. So she is a wealth of history. This woman shot a documentary, ran a grocery store, managed a band, while still doing all of this other work. And if you look at her and you look at the life of Betty Shabazz, Malcolm's wife, you'll find out that these were some of the hardest working women in the game during their time. And so it only made sense that when Betty Shabazz came here, she had a lot of reverence for Rowena Moore. And so there's pictures of Rowena and Betty at the Malcolm X Memorial Foundation. So just Rowena as a person, I never got a chance to meet her, but the legacy that she left behind, boy, I'm nothing compared to the shoes that she walked in.
Very unassuming person, showed a sense of humility in the way she talked and act, but was extremely powerful. And again, even what you're just sharing today, I did not know that, even though I've talked to her on numerous occasions, when she'd come down and kind of give me some light. I was a young whippersnapper, green around the ears, and she was kind of pulling me into the circle of get a little knowledge, and she was throwing a little light on me, but I wasn't ready to absorb all of that, but it was good. Switching up again, our community lacks news coverage. I recently invited one of the television news channels, I'm not going to mention Channel 3, and she canceled, but then she didn't follow through. And I wrote a letter and say, "Why did you back out? We're going to talk about bias in the media." She had an immediate publication she had to deal with it, but again, didn't follow through, kind of ghosted me. But my question back to you is, why is the news coverage of the white media so apart that in how they do their publication? What can we do to develop more effective network and communication of the media and so on when we see all this negativity they project about us as a people? And they've done that historically, but how can we change that? Or what suggestions would you have us to reverse this codification of negativity that they depict us as Africans, Americans, or Africans living in this community?
So I'm going to high level thought. I would say that we need to own our own businesses, which keeps money in our community, which would give us the dollars that we need to fund our own media outlets. I think that one of our biggest mistakes is that we don't support financially our media outlets. So as long as their dollars come from whatever advertisements they put on, et cetera, and we don't have the businesses to compete, then we can't dictate what goes on the news. I don't want to say, oh, we need to start our own media groups and start our own media companies. I think those things are great, that we need to tell our own stories, but there's plenty of people that can tell their own story. What they can't do is oftentimes get the financial backing that they need to stay sustaining
Oh,
themselves.
yes.
And in order to do so, our businesses need to thrive. So in order for our businesses to thrive, what I believe in is that we must accept Ebonics as our language. And as crazy as that sounds, try taking yourself to a community where you don't understand the language on the signs and you don't speak their language, then will you ever do commerce with them? Probably not. So if we understood the language that we speak, then we're more likely to be comfortable walking into an establishment and doing business with one another because we agree on our language and we agree on our terms of communication.
Good.
That
A little side note, John Houston recently died within the past year, and I got a chance to know him and some of the work that he did. We were talking one day years ago, and he told me whenever he ran a controversial story and story sometime that dealt with our community, some of his advertisers would call up. What's that? We're going to pull back some of our money. And so I found it problematic what he was saying. And with some of these issues that we talk about, they would use their money as leverage to either tone down. And again, that was one of the concerns he had because he had a number of reporters and staff members working for him. So that's another issue. When you get some of those dollars from those corporate capitalist organizations, and they'll say they don't like the fact we use the word racism or political correct or whatever they want to say, or whatever they do. But he did say that he did catch a lot of drama from some of those people who advertise. The other thing we have to acknowledge is the significance of the quest to get Malcolm X, who voted. I know you guys did a lot to get voting into the Hall of Fame, and that took a lot of work. We're talking years to make that happen. It was kind of almost a miracle to happen, looking at the composition of this all-white committee and so on. I know the two of them even changed their vote to make it unanimous. But my question is, uh, why was that so significant? And what are the next steps after you, excuse me, got that done?
So I would say that shout out to Joanna LaFleur and Shamika Simpson, who really helped organize that. And there were other players that were involved in that as well. So they were the main drivers to make that happen. In the background, Tim Heller, the former board member of the Malcolm X Foundation, who's a white man who was sitting on the historical committee, constantly reminded the organization that the opportunity was coming up so that there could be Malcolm in the Hall of Fame. And so Tim's work really helped push that forward and keeping the organization on its toes to make sure that happens. So believe it or not, there are some allies that do come through with what they promise.
Got you. One of the, if I remember right, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, one of the arguments why they didn't want him in the first place is they said he didn't live in Nebraska long enough or something like that. Does that ring a
Yeah,
bell?
that was one of the arguments, which is outrageous. But I'm not going to even go there. I'm glad he's there in the Hall of Fame. I'm done with what they talking about. We accomplished our goal. We're trying to keep him there. So nobody does anything goofy to try to remove his name.
By the way, earlier, Leo, you mentioned that there's some event coming up. Was it in May or something? You'll do some open house. You're doing some renovation. So is there gonna be some kind of a major event at the center coming up in May or sometime in the future?
Yeah, before I left the organization, that was in the works. There's the 100th anniversary of Malcolm's birth here in Omaha, Nebraska. So this Malcolm was born May 19th, 1925. It's 2025, so Malcolm would have been 100 years old. This is the 100th birthday celebration. So yes, there will be an event.
What about there with Jimmy Carter if he's still alive? That's deep, man. It's hard to comprehend. He died at the age
You
of,
know what's
beg your pardon?
crazy about yeah, Jimmy Carter. You mentioned Jimmy Carter, right?
Right.
So Jimmy Carter gave Coretta Scott King the Medal of Freedom Award when he was alive. Now, Coretta Scott King, of course, is the wife of Dr. Martin Luther King, and we know that our new president is about to be inaugurated, and he's mad about the flags being at half staff about Jimmy Carter, but he's going to be inaugurated on Martin Luther King Day.
Which
Ain't
is
that a coincidence?
I mean, strange situations and crazy. You know, the other thing that most people don't know, I think, and I saw that recently when I was at my sister's house in Houston, of the picture, that famous picture that Malcolm X and Martin Luther King only met once, and that was in the Capitol. So that's unusual. They both were assassinated at the age of 39. Again, they didn't get a chance to live their full life. And often, you know, you look in terms of how much life they threw out, both of them. I became much more enamored with Martin Luther King after I started reading a lot of his books and things like that and so on. But so, again, the more you start to study their teachings or their writings, and again, Malcolm has thousands of articles and books and is well respected throughout the world. I give Martin Luther King also, but I give homage more to Malcolm because he for me, was much more realistic growing up in my time with dealing with the raw racism we deal with in Omaha. Did you ever meet any of his children or any of them in the work that you were doing with the center? Because I was in New York and I saw his daughter speak there, but have you met them personally yourself?
I finally got to meet Ilyasa last year at the Hall of Fame event. So
That
that
was your
was
first time?
yep.
Okay. Yeah, we were in Harlem and we went to this place and one of the daughters was speaking and selling her books and we didn't meet her, but she was up in the stage, so I got a chance to see her. And then obviously, you know, that's it. We're got about a few minutes before we open it up. Is there anything else you wanted to say before we open it up? Anything that you wanted to say that we maybe missed or I may have rushed you in your introduction or whatever that you want to come back to, Leo? I got to crack you a little bit, bro.
This whole interview been rushed. I've been running through this thing.
That's
You
all
talk
right.
fast. You talk fast, man. You talk fast.
Hey, that's how it is. Okay. Anything else you want to say, though, Lou, that you want to come back to?
No, I'm okay, man. We can move on to the questions.
Yeah, we got a time zone we run with, so that's how we do it. Folks, I guess we're right up to the halfway point, a little before then. I want to open it up. We got about 11 folks here, and a lot of folks are watching us on Facebook. There's some people who may want to comment on through the, what we call through the message and so on. So we're going to open it up to Leo. This is basically a give opportunity to talk more to him. Somebody, Tony, do you want to speak to these questions? You guys want to speak to them, or do you just want me to read them? Because ideally, we're trying to get as many people on tape to participate with Leo directly instead of me running my mouth fast. Tony, did you want to say something here? He says, why is Malcolm not more incorporated in the curriculum in Omaha public schools? Leo, that's directed at you.
Yeah, what I've noticed is that there's a lot of teachers who do actually care about Malcolm being incorporated into the schools. There's a lot of teachers. There's teachers at North High who used to bring their whole class down to the Malcolm X Center during school days for tours for education. So the teachers are for it. I think that it's more or less a system thing. OPS is a big bureaucracy, and it's the bureaucracy of OPS that's more or less the challenge than it is the people's will or want or desire to have Malcolm in the schools.
So, somebody talked to me today about this, and I didn't know this, but the autobiography of Malcolm X, somebody said should be incorporated in high school. And I don't know if that's going on in OPS or other cities or whatever. Do you know anything about any of his writings or teaching? Are they using that in high school? Because I know at the college or university levels they do that, but locally, do you know if anybody's doing that with high school?
Yeah, I know a couple of teachers who actually make that a part of their curriculum in their classes. Yep, there are some high schools that do have Malcolm X teaching in their classrooms, but this is by the teacher's individual discretion. That has
Gotcha.
happened.
Folks, at this point, we're opening it up, so I'm trying to back out, and so y'all can send a chat, or you can open up your mic and talk directly to Leo, ask a question, make a comment, push back, whatever you want to do.
Right on. And I appreciate y'all.
Just a side note, most people watch our stuff on Facebook Live, and they also don't sign up on this because they don't want to be identified with some of our content. So I'll just say that.
You
Uh,
said they do what about your content?
in other words, they will not do the Zoom where their name is out there in the public light. They'll watch this after the fact. We did a survey of our Facebook Live afterwards, and so many people will go to our recordings of these programs, and a lot of it is afterwards versus doing what we're doing live.
Right on.
Right on. Hey, Jamal, this is Eric Ewing from the Great Plains Black History Museum. Hey, Leo, first of all, I want to say great work that you've been doing and that you've done throughout the community. And I myself definitely appreciate it. My question I was going to ask you was, what are some of your ideas or thoughts on getting more of the community nonprofits to be more to collaborate more or better with each other?
I appreciate that question. Ooh, that's a good question. The number one thing that I'd say is recognize what who we're actually fighting for. That's number one. Recognize who we're actually fighting for. Nonprofits get a few couple dollars and think that they fighting against another nonprofit. And the truth is who are you fighting for and what are you fighting for? We constantly forget that there's a system of oppression constantly working on us day in and day out. And then we get mad at other people for being successful in their endeavors because we feel like we could have done better or we could have done more. At the end of the day, we should celebrate everybody who's doing good work that moves our people forward. We might not agree with their personality, we might not agree with their tactics, but at the end of the day, we still have to celebrate that at least our people are the ones serving our people, if that's the opportunity that presents itself. But all too often, what I've seen is so many nonprofits fighting over a little bit of dollars, and that is by design. And so I always say nonprofits should treat their organization like a business. Offer good service, make sure that your customers are happy, aka your clients or the people that you serve, and that also includes the people that have invested in your nonprofit organization. Because if you treat it like a business, then it has the reputation that it's supposed to have to continue to be funded. And then we don't have to worry about fighting over funds and we can focus on the collaboration part. I think the collaboration is often hindered by the dollars that we're fighting for. And so if we can get that out of our head and actually focus on the work, we would do a lot better.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Other questions, other feedback?
Yeah, and I would also say that while you're looking that up, I recently had a conversation with a group that got some money and there was supposed to be some splits and some cutouts and some payouts and some things like that. And it's been a contentious conversation. However, the point of contention is not the money. The point of contention is how can we best serve and do we have the resources allocated properly so that the people who can do the best work have the proper resources that they need. And that's where the conversation really needs to go is who does the work, who does the best work, and do they have the resources they need? Instead, what happens is just, no, I just need the money just cause. No, it's, can you do the work too?
Related to that is I know some more organizations need to do surveys and evaluation of their event. I went to an event almost a year ago, Futures Omaha or Futures, whatever, Black Futures, and the clowns sat up in front lectures for 2 hours. And when there was a time I raised my hand, they didn't let you ask a question or even make a comment. I'm like, I don't want to come to a puppet show. I mean, again, say that up front, but in my 35, 40 years of working, I've never been in a meeting where there was at least some feedback from the audience or some opportunity to evaluation. But, again, I'm not in church services. I mean, I know you can't go to churches and say certain things and ask certain questions, and that's when I don't go to some of them. But my point is, if you're going to bring a community together, you need to measure how effective that is, have some demographics, and not use Facebook and self-promotions, which many of these handkerchief heads are doing in this community. So, again, it's one of the reasons our community looks like it does is we haven't asked the people, how was the food? It's like you go to a restaurant. And so we got to learn how to use data and numbers and engagement of the families. And we wonder why some of them don't show up. But again, it's about how can you be of service to people? That's one of the things that Ralph Abernathy said oftentimes. It's not how many servants you have, it's how you serve others. So yeah, we need to deal with that. Other feedback, other questions. I see a question here has asked from Judith Hills, embracing the possibility of thinking, what is your vision for North Omaha, Leo?
I envision North Omaha having a lot of Black people doing a lot of great Black things. I envision that North Omaha will be economically stable. I also envision that North Omaha will have healthy families. I envision that North Omaha will also be able to support itself and not be sustained by individuals outside of North Omaha for the majority of the things that we're trying to do. But in order for that to happen, it's going to take a lot more self-reflection for individuals, get out of these kind of silos of our egos and really get into understanding and having some humility and going and embracing one another here in North Omaha. Now, I know that sounds altruistic and all that stuff, but she said possibility thinking, and I'm thinking about the great possibilities. And
it was vision. That was the question, so we go with that. Other feedback, other reactions. Also, you can unmute your mic and talk directly to Leo if you want to.
Hello, Leo. This is Maya.
What's up, Maya? Yeah,
You know who I am.
Wait, why y'all laughing? Was this an inside joke here that we didn't
no,
get?
I sent her an email like 20 minutes ago. Now she's talking to me on this live. Dang. I'll just kidding.
All right. Well, the first thing I wanted to say, I wanted to thank you for your introduction, even though Al Jamal tried to interrupt you, because I never knew how you got connected with the Malcolm X. Even though I've known you all these years, I never knew how that came about. So I want to thank you for that. The other thing I wanted to talk about, because Al Jamal kind of mentioned this too, and the first question that you guys got about the Malcolm X with the curriculum. And I'll just say this real quick. My mother was an English teacher. She's the one that introduced me to Malcolm X. And
Mm,
when I first came to Omaha, I was just for sure that the book was going to be a part of the curriculum. And so
mm,
somebody asked the question, how come? And I heard you say that there's teachers that support it. I think the problem is that the community doesn't push for it to be a part of the curriculum. And I think now is the time to really push for it. Now that he's been put in the Hall of Fame, you're going
yep.
to have like Willa Cather, I think is in the Hall of Fame. And I'm sure they read her books or her
Mm,
stuff. And so I would say that the community needs to support the teachers and anyone who wants to make it a part of the curriculum. And there's
mm,
processes and everything that they have for that. But I just can't see a reason, or what I told Joanne, Joanna, I know there was pushback to put him in the Hall of Fame. There will be the
mm,
same pushback probably in making him a part of the curriculum. But if the community comes together and supports that ideal and pushes that ideal, I think it can happen. And even if it doesn't happen, when you're looking at the board members and the people on the school board, it'll give you an idea of who's who and what's what. Because I can't see a reason, and this is not just for Black children, this is for all children in Omaha. They should know that somebody as great as Malcolm X was born in their city. And then when you talk about his mother, that she worked in a building on 24th and Lake Street, that you can go and see where this person was born. You can bring all of this history to life for children and they can see that. And then that wonderful picture at the foundation where you see him and Malcolm, you see Martin Luther King and Malcolm X together, and you see those smiles on their faces. A lot of the kids have heard about Martin Luther King, but they haven't gotten that same knowledge about Malcolm X. So I think it has to do with the community and the community supporting and not always making the teachers or the leaderships in the school district. I talked to Al Jamal about this. The power is in the community. The public is supposed to be above the school board. So if the public and our community
mm.
wants that book as a part of the curriculum, we should make that known and push for that, just like we did with him in the Hall of Fame.
Agreed. Agreed. And I think this is where we can take some accountability as individuals in our community. I know Ajmal is knowledgeable about Malcolm X. Maya, I know you're knowledgeable about Malcolm X. I'm somewhat knowledgeable about Malcolm X. And I believe that we have to take accountability for our version of education. We don't have to rely on their public schools to educate our children. And this is some of the things that I think the Malcolm X Foundation can do better, which is offer more classes about Malcolm X, promote it heavily in the community, and get people up there educated about Malcolm. Because then educated people can then demand from the system what it wants to see in the system change because they're educated about Malcolm, know how to make those connections, and then actually push for that particular change. But individuals who don't know nothing about Malcolm can't advocate for Malcolm. And just like you said, there's a lot of people who got introduced to Malcolm through somebody that they know. Then how come our institutions, Black-led institutions, aren't promoting Malcolm more first before we try to go to these other institutions to promote Malcolm X? So we got some onus on ourselves that we have to step up to do as well.
And if I could just, I told Al Jamal I don't like dominating the conversation, but you brought up that other point. One reason why I feel like it's a good idea to advocate for it. It makes me, even if they do it or don't, is what you just said and what Malcolm has taught us. If they don't do
Mhm.
it, we can do it. And if we have the building and the facilities, and we instead of us always saying, "Oh, you got to teach our kids about their history," I'll say this: when I was going to student teach at North, when I initially came to Omaha and was thinking of teaching math or whatever, but I was there at North, and they had an African American history class, and I'm not trying to say anything racial or whatever, but it was a blonde haired, blue eyed gentleman that was going to teach
Mhm.
African American history. So again, why are we, and if we can't teach our children, why do we
Mhm.
expect somebody else, another group that a lot of times we'll say, oh, they're not going to do right by us or whatever, but we're going to try to force them to do what we can do for ourselves. So, like you said, if we have the facilities, the buildings, the Malcolm X Foundation, Black churches, all these things,
Correct.
how come we can't educate our kids about the people we want them to be educated about? So I thank you for that part, because that's the part I forgot. Because I was saying, if they don't do it in OPS, you know me, and you argue about this. I still push for the public school system to do some things, but if they're not doing it, just like with homeschooling and private schools, then we got to learn how to do it for ourselves at the same time. It can be both. It doesn't have to be either or.
I agree. I agree. But I'm always gonna be on the side of do for self. I mean, that's why I had a moving
That's what
business.
Malcolm is.
Nobody telling me that, oh, you doing this and you doing that and you getting paid by so and so. I've always been an entrepreneur in my later in these recent 2 decades, and so I think that those things are important. We do got to do for self, but I would also say that there are a lot of system things that get in our way, and we can't ignore those things. I think that the system things that get in our way, we need to acknowledge those things and then find strategies to overcome them, but not ignore them, because oftentimes we ignore them. And then we say, well, how come we can't do this? How come we can't do that? And in reality, there's a lot of things we can do. And what we need to do is focus on the things that we can do, not what we don't do or what we can't do. I remember I was in a meeting, and this is important, so I hope nobody forgets this. I was in a meeting, and it was a networking meeting of young Black professionals, not like the type that Ajma was talking about earlier. This was more grassroots. And it's probably about 30 people in the room. And somebody got on the mic and said, well, one of our problems is we can't come together. And I had to stop them right there and say, hold up. You don't even understand that that's part of the brainwashing that you have received. You are in a room full of Black folks here to network about business. We've had a great time, and you stood up and said, we can't come together while we're together. That shows you the psychological trick that's been played on you into believing that you're not together, even when you are together. And this is the thing we have to undo in our own psychology, is that we self-deprecate all the time. We put ourselves down all the time as if we not, when in reality we are, and we do, and we can, and we will, and we overcome often. Very, very often. So much so that it's so common that we forget about it. And we need to highlight those things and remember those things. So part of my vision of my work moving forward is to highlight those things, highlight our greatness, and make sure that we don't get tricked in our own head because we let the system do a number on us to divide us up.
Yeah. Very good feedback. Yeah, as you mentioned, the issue of Willa Cather. I remember my Antonia High School. I remember the kind of books that they use. Joseph Conrad, Heart of Darkness, but most of all, Huckleberry Finn, stuff like that. So again, you wonder how they bring some of that drivel, that stuff in there, and particularly today when the school district is basically 70 to 80%, 90% students of color, you would think they would get the curriculum and some of those Becky's and Jane's and those other folks who were, great white saviors or daughters of the Confederacies who are teaching our children would at least understand why some of these kids are disinterested in some of the textbook because they don't relate to their experiences. And again, Joseph Conrad was one of the most racist writers about Africa and elsewhere. But again, you can imagine an impact on somebody who's 17 and 16 years old or 17, 18 in high school and that. So we got to make sure the curriculum doesn't denigrate us and, as Leo, as you alluded to, brainwashing codification so that we walk around looking at some of these folks who like zombies and refuse to use the word, handkerchief head or plantation or racist or whatever. And so again, it is what it is. I'm not going to mention name brother from Oakland, but I was on the phone call with him and one of his Black colleagues, and I used some word like plantation or something. He said, I can't use that word. I said, it's three of us on the phone call. We all Black, but I can't use that word. And I'm like, well, okay, well then me and you ain't got nothing else to talk about it again. So if we can't even use, as you lose Ebonics, some of us talk fast, some of us break our language, but that should not stop us from being able to communicate effectively if we're talking in our native language, how we grew up in our communities. But let me throw it back out to the audience. I see another comment up here. Joe, did you want to say that or read that of folks who voices somewhat muted today? Question is, our statement was, many in the community do not even know the history of Malcolm X. Education begins at home and continues throughout the Black organization. So basically, I'm understanding that we should, as you said earlier, everyone, that we should start at home and not wait for these institutions that despise us. And I know Malcolm uses the word foxes and wolf, and he said they both kind of funny smile, and we think one is afraid of the other, but they both like chickens.
I think, yes. Something you said just a minute ago, I think is so important to highlight, which is the indoctrination process that happens in our educational institutions. Now, I don't have a problem with public school. I was educated by public school. I have a problem with how public school is teaching us from a perspective of race or as a cultural group of people. When you have a group of students that are systematically being disenfranchised through the curriculum, you have a problem. And like you said, Huckleberry Finn has the N-word in it. There's not a single text that I know of in the OPS curriculum or any other curriculum across this nation that denigrates another group of people in the classroom. So little black kids are embarrassed when they have to read the chapter where the N-word shows up in there. The whole reason there's an Ernie Chambers in Omaha, Nebraska, is because when he was a kid, the teachers made him at Lothrop School read Little Black Sambo in front of his class. And when the white kids teased him and called him Little Black Sambo, he said, I will never be treated like this again. I'm going to change the education system. And that drove him to become a senator. All because of somebody, a teacher, having in the curriculum a racist text that was allowed in the schools. And the only reason that it got taken out of the schools is because Ernie got old enough to go fight it as a state senator. So imagine carrying that kind of pain his whole entire life to the point where it drove him to be a senator to fight for his people just because they did that to him. And there's so many black children who disengaged, like Ajamal talked about, from the educational system in general, because in kindergarten, they had to sing Follow the Drinking Gourd in kindergarten class. There's no other racial or ethnic group of people who are denigrated from kindergarten all the way to 12th grade before they graduate, except for black children. And that's product of the Malcolm X Memorial Foundation, where me and one of my mentors sat down and went through every single textbook in OPS and recognized that it is no other group of people who are isolated and shown the horrors of what America has done to them, except for black children as young as kindergarten. I didn't let my kids in kindergarten watch Jason versus Freddy movies. So why would I send them to school and let them learn about slavery in kindergarten? And this is the type of stuff that happens to black children specifically.
But then I don't mean to interrupt, but I do mean to interrupt, is that, as I said, we need to take accountability ourselves. And I believe Malcolm X taught that. If you read Malcolm X, he said, we need to take and stop allowing individuals who have taught us to hate ourselves and our culture and our history. And if you don't start at home, you can go back right now. Then why do you allow our children to listen to rap songs, television programs who degrade us? You complain that these books and things degrade our children, but how many of us sat and watched Dynamo and those types? How many sat, and every day right now, you can't drive and listen to something on your car, in your automobile, because you got to listen to so-and-so next to you in his automobile. And if we degrade ourselves, how can you demand and encourage other races not to demean you? So how do you address that? Malcolm X, if you know his teaching, he didn't curse constantly. He didn't allow, individuals to call him that. And one thing I learned from a pastor who spoke, wasn't my pastor, but who came to the church listed. He said, in the Bible, it says, Moses told Pharaoh, let my people go. He let his people go, but we won't let Pharaoh go. And we need to take responsibility. And sometimes it upsets me is because we keep on saying the man and this and that, but where does our responsibility and accountability? Done.
Okay. All right. I appreciate you. And I hear that a lot. I've heard that a lot at the Malcolm X Center. And what I've learned over the years is I started studying what you're talking about. And I realized there are so many of us who are taking accountability, so many of us who are trying our hardest to combat the narratives that our children receive, that our families are. There's so many generational curse breakers, if you will, that are trying to do something different. However, I think it's very important to highlight that we do not own the media. We do not own the radio. We do not own YouTube. We do not own Facebook. We do not own the distribution channels in which this information, the movies, the blaxploitation of the 70s all the way up to now, we don't own those institutions. So those institutions are responsible for putting out the trash.
We do not have to listen to it, Leo. We do not have to set our children down. When we didn't have TV, or when we didn't have such things, older people would tell me how they would sit and have communication and talk to each other. Now that does not happen. So, again, going and saying that down, Malcolm X said, if you own it, you control it.
That's right.
And that's what we don't get. And when we talk about all this entrepreneurship, just as I put out on Facebook today, is, this 2025 Empowerment Network Summit's coming up again, talking about 2030. What about right now? 18 years that's been going on, and what change have we seen? So minimal, it's not even accountable. So, I can understand, and we all have our, sayings, you say, and I say, and whoever else is on here. But the thing is, until we change, nothing is going to change.
Right on. I agree with that. I just want to know, how do we change? From your perspective, how would we change? How would a person who only knows ignorance?
You went mute a little bit like that. By the way,
how would a person who only knows a certain lifestyle, or only knows a certain social condition, who grew up in poverty, or grew up listening to those things, or grew up without parents, or grew up in this environment, in oftentimes urban ghettos, how would that person escape to find something better if they've never been exposed to it?
And I can understand that. One of the things that I did for myself was to take and become a mentor for the Big Brothers and Big Sisters organization. And I tried to take the little girl that I was assigned to different things. And her family would tease her when she'd come back from being taken to the orphan theater and stuff. But I would always try to encourage her to say, and when I was wanting to quit, one of the people took me aside and says, that may be true, but just every time that you have and spend that time with her and show her difference will make a difference. And from that point on, I set myself to say, I'm going to help. If I can help one, maybe that will be enough to encourage that one to say, I know something different. And we have to start taking accountability, responsibility, and just like the Malcolm X, how come we aren't taking our children to the Malcolm X in order to show that to them? And if you, like you just said, if they've been to this and they don't know how, those of us who know about Malcolm X, why aren't we making it so we're taking at least one every single week to whatever Malcolm X is hosting? Why aren't we taking some children who don't know that and who might be? How come we aren't going into these various organizations that have our children and saying, we want to take them here, we'll pay for it? And I'm going to stop because I want to let somebody else maybe get in.
I'm going to interrupt you too, Cheryl. You know how I am. Hey, quick point that I think we don't want to forget. We pay taxes, and we don't see our representation in City Hall, meaning enough people working there. County government looks like apartheid government. State government, there are very few African Americans who work there. So one of the things I also want to say is that, yes, we want to have some ownership we run, but we should not be paying taxes and they exclude some jobs, or they won't hire us, but they hire their buddies. Last point. In my lifetime, I've never seen a person of color as a counter on the street in Omaha. Again, you drive down, you see these people counting traffic and that. Those are jobs that get out to cronies in this patronage system. So my point is, if we're going to pay taxes, we should at least have some proportional representation in City Hall. Our city is 35% people of color, but you go into City Hall, you go into state government, you might see one of us pushing a broom or in a broom closet. So yes, sure, I hear what you're saying, but we also got to be careful that we shouldn't be financing these other folks' retirement pay, and we never get those lucrative benefits they get using tax dollars. But we only got about 8 minutes left, and I want to give other folks a chance to comment and so on. I see there's a comment here says thoughts on James by Perceiver Everett. I don't know. Is that okay? Is that the person who was in jail? Somebody help me with that one. Mark Schultz from Facebook asked a thing. So it's a Perceiver Everett. Is there something going on that you know about, Lewis, on that one?
No, I'm not familiar.
Okay.
I'm not sure what that actually means at this time.
I didn't know that. Other feedback. We got about 5 minutes or 4 minutes left. I want to give other feedback, and also, Louis, I want you to give closing comments to anything you want to say.
While people are bringing their feedback up, I do want to say that one of the things she talked about, personal accountability, and I love that because that's how I came into the Malcolm X Foundation, is thinking about how can I be of service and how can I make an impact. And so I boost to the ground, start moving, and that's what people know me for. They know me for boost to the ground, moving, and also being very specific about communicating and making sure that our community is aware of the things that we do. So I am a board member of Leaders Art Legends Academy, which was birthed out of the suspension ban or the suspension of our children who are disproportionately suspended in the public school system. And so now Leaders Art Legends exists, birthed out of a homeschool co-op that is Black led and is homeschooling parents who are teaching their own children, taking full accountability for their education, taking them to those places, getting them that education, and making sure that they are properly knowing who they are, and that is coming from their parents. It's not coming from outside individuals. So our community is taking accountability. And like I said, there's many people who are taking accountability on making sure things happen.
Quick question, Leo, and I'm very critical of post-secondary education in Omaha, Creighton, UNO, and elsewhere, University of No Opportunities. How often are you invited to speak at the university? Again, they have social work department, education department, Black studies. Again, how many grassroots folks do you know get invited out to these bastions of higher education Ivy Towers? Are you getting invited out there to speak in classes or guest lecture from time to time?
No, not very often to lecture. No, but I have gotten an opportunity at UNMC where I do adjunct for community-based participatory research. And that's because a sister seen the skill that I had and decided to, give me an opportunity. But other than that, no, universities don't often reach out to me. I do have a relationship with UNO International Studies Department, and I do speak once a year for them, but I don't see that happening in mass. There should be a lot more engagement with these institutions, especially with people like myself and others who are doing the work, who do provide solutions, and who are seeing success. I'm just not that person that's going to sit down and do a PowerPoint on it and tell you about all the people that I say.
Well, I know someone got these PowerPoints that get created in Texas, so they talk like they come off that plantation, whatever it goes. Again, I don't know a lot of grassroots folks and elders in our community who are invited out there, but I just know for sure. Folks, we got a minute or two, but any last minute for Leo? Leo, do you want to say anything before we close down? Because we want to stay on time.
I mean, I appreciate this opportunity, Jamal, and I just appreciate you being a freedom fighter for as long as you have. I've seen news articles about you and from 1989. It's 2025, you still doing the work. So it's always a beautiful thing to just be in company with folks. And it helps me and it keeps me inspired and it keeps people I know that are around me inspired to know that there is a lane for your passion, a lane for the love of community, and a lane for the love of Black folks. Because it's hard out here when you look around and you don't see too many of us standing on business, being who we are, and being unapologetic about it. And especially in this city, if you do the wrong thing, you breathe wrong, somebody ready to take you out and X you out and box you out. Unfortunately, you can't box me out because I'm not going nowhere. I'm going to keep on making the way.
Yeah, as you say that, I like to say that I'm at an age where I'm Social Security proof, so I can't got to look over my shoulders like I used to working with county government or with Catholic charities. But one of the things I will say, and I think is very important, we get paid for doing work 8 to 5, but they don't control us after 5 o'clock or so on. And some of these Negroes in handkerchief act like they still on the clock in their monkey suits and elsewhere. But I think the key thing is when you look at some of these young whippersnappers, they can't write, they can't talk, and some of them got PhDs. I'm sure they're honorary degrees because how do you go to college, get a PhD, and you do a Google search and there's nothing postgraduate work from these individuals who've been learned and so on. And I know we offer scholarships to a lot of our kids, and again, if they get their scholarships, they blow town, and again, we get nothing from it. So I think we got to develop better accountability and do something. But Leo, I really appreciate you being on the show today. Hopefully we'll get you back soon again. I know it's kind of a understanding on setting some of this up, but we need to have true messengers. We use the word credible messengers and people who are grass tops to push back at these systems that are so oppressive. And again, people lose their voice sometime, and we have to help them reclaim it. But thank you very much for being on the show today, and hopefully we'll get you back soon to continue this wonderful conversation.
Right on.
Before we close out, I'm going to make 2 announcements. One, we're going to have a book discussion coming up on the 28th of January. It's going to be at the North Branch of the Washington Branch Library. Heather is going to help us. Reza is going to help us with that discussion. And the name of the book is called The Sum of Us. They do have copies at the library. I talked to Amy today. The name of the author is Heather McGee. And by the way, what's fascinating is Amy, who's the director at the Washington Branch, suggested this book about racism, and I had a chance to read it, and it's in my top 10. It's that well written and developed about community engagement and some of the issues we talked about today. The other thing that we're going to do, and I just want to highlight, is we've invited Cami Watkins, who is the Director of Inclusive Community. I know they picked up Table Talk after we finished, and so we want to talk to her about race issues and some of her experience of running that organization and where they're going to deal with. And again, it's the same venue of how can we challenge each other and have conversations to elevate racial conversations and racial healings, because as Leo alluded to, and some of us can say, we were traumatized by our educational system, and it took years to undo some of that, unpack that. So we're looking forward to hosting some events coming up more. We'll encourage other people to do that. We also hope to have a number of dinners and events where people can eat and fellowship and talk about what do we do after the conversations or the interviews. So hope you will join us more. Again, we're like, as Leo alluded to, we're a volunteer board. People think we got a big budget and we got a tiny budget, but we're inverted pyramid. We try to get folks at the bottom to be to the top and elsewhere. And so we would hope that you would join us in the future. And again, hold other folks accountable, because there's no excuse in 2025 for us to be encountering some of the stuff that our grandparents encountered back in the day. And so appreciate all of y'all joining us, and stay tuned by looking at our website, and again, challenge us to make it a better place than what we found it when we arrived upon this existence of, as we call it, the mothership. So thank you again for being with us, and we hope to see you more. As we always say, may the force be with you. Welcome.